الأرض وليس له من دونه أولياء أولئك في ضلال مبين أولم يروا أن الله الذي خلق السماوات والأرض ولم يعي بخلقهن بقادر على أن يحيي الموتى بلى إنه على كل شيء قدير ويوم يعرض الذين كفروا على النار أليس هذا بالحق قالوا بلى وربنا قال فذوقوا العذاب بما كنتم تكفرون فاصبر كما صبر أولو العزم من الرسل ولا تستعجل لهم كأنهم يوم يرون ما يوعدون لم يلبثوا إلا ساعة من نهار بلاغ فهل يخلف إلا القوم الفاسقون بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الذين كفروا وصدوا عن سبيل الله أضل أعمالهم والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وآمنوا بما نزل على محمد وهو الحق من ربهم كفر عنهم سيئاتهم وأصلح بالهم ذلك بأن الذين كفروا اتبعوا الباطل وأن الذين آمنوا اتبعوا الحق من ربهم كذلك يضرب الله للناس أمثالهم فإذا لقيتم الذين كفروا فضرب الرقاب حتى إذا أثخنتموهم فشدوا الوثاق فإما منا بعد وإما فداء حتى تضع الحرب أوزارها ذلك ولو يشاء الله لانتصر منهم ولكن ليبلو بعضكم ببعض والذين قتلوا في سبيل الله فلن يضل أعمالهم سيهديهم ويصلح بالهم ويدخلهم الجنة عرفها لهم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن تنصروا الله ينصركم ويثبت أقدامكم والذين كفروا فتعسا لهم وأضل أعمالهم ذلك بأنهم كرهوا ما أنزل الله فأحبط أعمالهم
Okay. Bismillah. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man walahu wa ba'd. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. ربي يسر وأعني يا كريم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. So today we're going to start with session 7 of Introduction to the Hanbali Madhhab, and we'll be talking about what a mufti does when there is no madhab, what a faqih does when there is no madhab. So now we've gone through the history, the books, the personas, the decision makers, the decision making process, the research process. Now we want to start looking at the further research process of when we don't find we don't find something that's already been said in the school. Where do we go from there? Okay. So, as we mentioned, this is lesson 7 in our um, series, and we'll be talking a little bit more about the practical applications as we go on, inshallah ta'ala. So, when we talk about the madhab, what is the madhab? Now, the word madhab is masdar mimi from dhahaba, to go. So, فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ, Allah says, so where are you going? So, when we say madhab, it is the place that the scholar went from or arrived to. In al-insaf and al-musawwada, we find the madhab to be defined as what the imam said, what can be understood from what he said, from implied speech or other than it. Ibn Hamdan in Sifat al-Fatwa, he defines this as the explicit statements or implied statements, or that which includes the illah which he used. Now remember, we said before, when we're talking about the madhahib fiqhiyah, the madhahib fiqhiyah are not the deen of Islam. The deen of Islam is overarching. The deen of Islam is broad. The deen of Islam encompasses all. The madhahib, I like to put it as the madhab of an imam is like a ladder. It is the tool that you use to ascend the rungs of the ladder until you get to a certain level, until you get to the level that you need to be at. What are those rungs on the ladder? What the scholars are saying here, those things that the imam said could be understood, or the ilal that he expressed himself, the rational bases upon which rulings were applied. Now, this is a whole area we don't have time to get into here, but العلل الشرعية أو علل الأحكام هي الأوصاف المناسبة لشرع الحكم. The legal rationale or the rationale for rulings under Islamic law are the appropriate descriptions for which a ruling is legislated. They are the appropriate attributes that, when present in something, means that a rule applies. وَالْعِلَلُ نَوْعَانِ, and these types of rationale are two types: عِلَلٌ مَنْصُوصَةٌ وَعِلَلٌ مُسْتَنْبَطَةٌ. Bismillah. They are two types: textually substantiated rationale, and those which are derived. What's an example of a textually substantiated rationale? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إذا غربت الشمس من هاهنا وأقبل الليل من هاهنا فقد أفطر الصائم. When the sun sets from here and the night proceeds from here, then the fasting person has broken their fast. Therefore, we know that the setting of the sun completely is a illah, it is a legal cause for one to break their fast. How do we know that? Because it was tied to two very apparent, observable phenomena. What is an illah mustanbata? A derived rationale. Derived rationale is, for example, جاء أعرابي إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقالوا هلكت وأهلكت وقعت على أهلي في نهار رمضان فأمره النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بالصيام فقال إنما أوقعني في هذا مثل يعني إنما أوقعني في هذا الصيام أو كما ورد عنه رضي الله عنه فأمره بعتق رقبة وأمره بالتصدق فقال ما لي أتصدق به فقال تصدق به على فقراء قومك فقال على أفقر منا يا رسول الله. Okay, so a Bedouin man comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's number one. He says, I am destroyed and I have destroyed. I have fallen upon my wife during the daytime of Ramadan, meaning he had intercourse with his wife. The Prophet ﷺ orders him to fast. He says, I'm only in this situation because of fasting. He orders him to free a slave. He says he doesn't have the ability. He orders him to feed the poor. He says, I don't have what I can feed the poor with. He gathers sadaqah for him. He says, go give this to the poor. He says, should I give it to someone poorer than myself? The Prophet ﷺ laughs. He must make up his fast and he must pay the kafara. Why must he make up his fast? Does he make up his fast because he is Bedouin? Does he make up his fast because he can't manumit a slave? Does he make up his fast because fasting got him into that situation? Does he make up his fast because he's poor? Does he make up his fast because he's from outside of Medina? Does he make up his fast because he's married? Does he make up his fast because he had intercourse? This is what they call a sabru taqsim. The idea of surveying and inductively deducing or inductively reducing the possibilities to one. So some ulama said, we look at all of these different awsaf, all of these different descriptions. The only one we find that is appropriate for him to be considered as having to pay this kafara and having to make up his fast is the fact that he had intercourse during the daytime of Ramadan. So you might say, well, that sounds like it's mansusa. That sounds like it is explicitly textually substantiated. Other ulama, they said, no, it's not the fact that he had intercourse with his wife. It's the fact that through all of these actions, he violated the sanctity of the Ramadan day. And therefore, anyone who violates the sanctity of the day of Ramadan must do the same thing, regardless of whether somebody willfully, knowingly eats, drinks, or has intercourse. They have to pay the same kafara. There's a khilaf between the ulama. So one evidence, these ulama, they say, this is apparent in that the textual reason is intercourse. These ulama, they say that it is apparent that the implied reasoning is violation of the sanctity of a day of Ramadan. This is why we have the development of the madhahib of Islam, legal schools, where each of them looked at the same evidence and said, we're going to use it like this, or we're going to use it like that. Another hadith. أصبح النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال لعائشة هل لنا من طعام؟ قالت لا. قال إني إذن صائم. The Prophet ﷺ wakes up. He says, do we have any food to Aisha? Aisha says, no. He said, in that case, I'm fasting. Does it another day, another day, another day. Comes back. He says, do we have any food? She says, أهدي لنا حيث. Some hays was given to us. It was given to us as a gift. If you don't know hays, it's where you take dates and honey and jamid or aqit and some kind of flour, mostly barley, and semen, like ghee, and you essentially kind of cook it together and you make a paste. It's quite good. You don't have to put aqit, but some people do. So he says, "I'tini, i'tini, i'tini, i'tini bihi. Bring it to me." So, was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam starting his fast once he heard there was no food, or continuing his fast when he knew he couldn't break it? Same hadith. Implications and explicit statements abound. Which one do you take? This is why we study the madhahib, so that we can learn a consistent method of understanding the speech of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam based upon holistically looking at the evidences, based upon holistically understanding the Arabic language, and then being consistent in that. So in the Hanbali madhab, what is the madhab of Imam Ahmad? It is his explicit statements, his implied statements, and those things that he said there is an illah for. So even if he didn't say do X or do Y, but he said Z is a reason one should not do something or do something, then that also becomes his school. So what do we attribute to the Imam? Well, by way of what he has said, we can attribute to him explicit statements, implicit statements, tacit approvals, and then what was understood from him. So, for example, if Saleh or Abdullah says something like, had my father heard this, he would have said this. We understand that he was the closest, those two were two of the closest people to Ahmed, and therefore they understood what his legal reasoning was by nature. And then by way of qiyas, by way of analogy, you can make analogy on these other things. Okay. What do you do when you're looking through all your Hanbali books? You went out and you downloaded all the Hanbali books you could download, and you went and tried to find all of the prints that you could find. And you meticulously thumbed through all of these books, and you couldn't find the madhab explicitly addressing one issue. What do you do? When there's no mu'tamad, there's no official established position, and there's no statement from the Imam. Now, it must be said, and this is actually one of the strengths of the Hanbali madhab, that due to the expansive nature of Imam Ahmad's opinions, in that everyone that he preceded him that had a valid opinion, he would at least try to practice that one time in his life. This makes it very difficult to claim that primary issues of his time were not addressed. It is very rare to find an issue in the other madhahib that has not been addressed in the madhab of Ahmed, either through him concurring with it, modifying it, or going against it. Because if the Salaf had said or done something, then he would do or say it at least once. Why? Because he valued the relative truth value of that statement, even though it might be weaker or stronger depending upon its evidences. Therefore, the absence of a statement from the Imam would be restricted to those issues that appeared in his lifetime. Most of the time, he has commented on most of what had appeared during his lifetime. But what about those things that happen after the Imam has died? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. When I started learning, I used to say ridiculous things like, it seems like people are, they're not doing enough to know what the evidences are, and they're trying to just look at what Ahmed did. And maybe some, they didn't have access to the books of hadith. But when you look at the Musnad of Imam Ahmed, 10,000 some hadith, it encompasses the entirety of the Kutub al-Sitta as well as additional hadith. And the Imam, he said, "Ma min hadithin," there's no hadith in this book except ittakhadahu an-nasu imaman. Some people have taken this as their guide, their leader, their evidence. Doesn't mean that he accepted all of it, but everything that's in the Musnad has been taken into consideration in some way. So when you start to understand the Arabic language better, then you start to realize, yes, you can have one hadith and it can validly be understood both ways. Inni idhan sa'imun. Inni idhan sa'imun. The Prophet ﷺ saying, in that case, I'm fasting. What do you do with this hadith? I say, no, brother, إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهبي. And the hadith is sahih, it is my madhhab. We say, على العين والرأس. So it's an idiom that doesn't really translate well into English. In Arabic they say, on my eyes and on my head. Remember, someone told me that the first time. They said, على عيني, on my eye. I said, take it out of your eye. I don't need you sticking things in your eye. I just need it to get done. Meaning, at your service. When the hadith is authentic, then that is what we go to. But when the hadith is authentic, it must be, as Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar said, read within the context of all of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَإِنَّ أَحَادِيثَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ sallallahu alaihi wasallam كَحَدِيثٍ واحد. Because the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam are like one large hadith. Okay? But inni idhan sa'im, in this case, I'm fasting. This could mean two things. It could mean I wasn't fasting, now I'm fasting. This is the madhhab of Ahmed, the official madhhab. Or I was fasting and I'll continue fasting. And all of this clinches on, if we're only looking at this hadith, it all clinches on the use of idhan. إذن وعمله أو عدم عمله. And الطوفي in الصاعقة الغضبية على منكر العربية has, I think, if I recall correctly, he talks a little bit about this issue in there. Essentially, it's a book talking about how fiqh rulings are taken from the Arabic language. Now, there's another qawl, and wifaqan li ba'd al-madhahib, that the Prophet ﷺ was fasting and then continued his fast. Why? Because of the other hadith, لا صيام لمن لم يبيت النية من الليل. There's no fast for one who did not make that intention at night. We're not going to get into which is more correct here. My point is that when we go through these things, and these, I hope you can تتحملون, you'll kind of bear with me with these kind of, trajectories that we shoot off into, is to say that this is not just everybody being obsessed with Ahmed and thinking that he's a replacement for the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What this is people saying this is a scholar that had gathered so much of the Sunnah of the Prophet alaihi wasallam, had met so many people from the Salaf, had such a great understanding of Quran, of Hadith, of the Arabic language, of the actions of the Salaf, that we're going to try and approximate what his opinion was when he was silent, because we have more confidence in his opinion than we do our own. So what about issues that come after? Somebody says, well, I'm not worried about whether, I can eat hace after I wake up or not. Now I'm hungry for hace. Somebody says, I am a diabetic and I want to know if I can take an insulin shot while I am fasting. There were no needles at that time. So what are they going to do? They would look and see, what are those things where there is an illah, there is a rational ruling, a ratio legis, that is an appropriate description for creating a ruling or for establishing a ruling, and then they would apply it to that rule. So some said, well, if you're injecting something into your blood, then it's like you have ingested it into your GI tract. Another said, well, no, it's actually more akin to me putting lotion on my skin and my skin absorbing that lotion. Another said, no, it's actually not like that. It's like if you had a cut that was open and you put salt inside the wound, because it's actually touching the circulatory system. And they would look at it all these different ways. But why are we going through this? Not for some droll exercise in what ifs. It is because the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is to take a situation and approximate it to the closest thing that applies to it. Ilhaq al-shabah bil-shabah wal-nadhir bil-nadhir. And this became a whole science called al-ashbah wal-nadha'ir. Okay. So we look for an illah that would apply, but it had not been applied. If it wasn't applied by him, then the ashab would have applied it. If the ashab didn't apply it, then it remains an ihtimal, a possibility in the school. If it was unaddressed by the ihtimal, then what do we do? So he said, okay, Imam Ahmed didn't say this, but he mentioned a ruling. If that ruling, does it apply or not? Let's just say, for example, Imam Ahmed is asked about a dog that dies and falls into a salt pit. And a person comes back a year later and they find no dog, but just a big lump of salt. Can you eat that salt or not? Let's just say that he doesn't address that issue. But he says that if a najasa, an impurity, is changed and disappears, then it's no longer a najasa. But then we find the ashab commenting on this issue of the salt pit. And we don't find anything expressed from them, but they say it's possibly this, it's possibly that. It's possibly allowed because al-hukm yaduru ma illatihi wujudan wa adaman. The ruling for something is contingent on its rationale, both in applying and not applying that ruling. Or they say no, because this is something which is impure in its essence, therefore it does not change. This is one way to look at it. This is and it's unaddressed. So now when we have these issues that are like this, like that, what do we do? This is an issue that comes up with like the people were trying to say, oh, the Hanbali school doesn't have, it's okay to smoke, or that smoking, doesn't have, there's no fatwa on smoking. We'll talk about that. We'll kind of go through that with what's been related on that issue. What do you do in that case where the older books are silent, or they simply leave you with an A/B test, test A, test B? Okay, Ibn al-Qayyim, he says, when an issue does not have a mujtahid who has addressed it, the Prophet and his companions after him would lead the ummah according to the guidance of the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Sharia that he was sent with is in no need of anything alongside it. Anyone that needs something other than it has not grasped it in knowledge nor applied it himself. What is Ibn al-Qayyim saying here? Is he saying that forget everything that was just said and just stick to the Quran and the Sunnah? No, what he's saying is, مَا فَرَّطْنَا فِي الْكِتَابِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. We have not left out anything in the book. This is an I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in. إِنَّ هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ يَهْدِي لِلَّتِي هِيَ أَقْوَمُ. Indeed, this Quran guides to that which is most upright. So the Quran does not address the minutia of every single incident, but instead it gives the substantive principles for an incident, or an incident upon which everyone can take a general ruling. For example, if we needed a verse to be revealed about every single instant or every single issue that was presented to itself during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, then every time someone needed to make tayammum, a verse of the Quran would have to have been revealed telling that person to make tayammum. But instead, we have one instance where the people were traveling. Aisha radiallahu anha lost her necklace. The people stopped. The caravan was delayed. They did not have water. They asked, the verses of tayammum were revealed. Those verses now become a case study for every single situation where somebody does not have water and needs to purify themselves for prayer. So you have the substantive principles in the Sharia that allow you to address issues that are unaddressed. Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, whenever a person is able to follow the texts, then he should not seek other than that, except to apply his acumen, ijtihad ra'yah, and yajtahid ra'yahu, to know that things are similar or alike, as we said before, al-ashbah wa al-nadha'ir. Rarely is a person adept in the texts of the Sharia unable to find one that addresses the issue. He then gives the idea of ihtikar as an example. I believe this is in a siyas al-shar'iyya, if I recall. Ihtikar is what? Al-muhtakiru khati', kama qala Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. A monopolist is wrong. So what is wrong with me buying lots of stuff and buying it and buying it and buying it and storing a whole warehouse of all of the generators that could ever be bought and sold on the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana, and saying, I'm going to wait until hurricane season, and when the first hurricane hits, I'm gonna then jack the price up 1,000% and sell those generators. What's wrong with that? It's my money, my strategy. It's private property. Ibn Taymiyyah here, he says, this is private property that causes a general harm to the public. And therefore, al-dararu yuzal, harm must be removed. A person's personal benefit cannot bring about a widespread public harm. In the same way that a person who monopolizes a marketplace or a supply chain or similar would also be prevented from doing so. And he counts countless examples. Where are we getting what is the underlying issue here? The underlying issue here is not just saying, we'll make analogy on the idea of monopoly. No, it's the idea that what is the underlying rationale behind monopoly being impermissible? It is the presence of harm. So what does that mean? There at times we need to have monopolies on things because it's not beneficial for society that everyone goes and tries to create their own medicine and do so in a way which is unregulated and harmful and raising prices. Now, for those of you who are watching in the United States, this is going to be very hard for you to comprehend because we have a pharmaceutical industry which is the exact opposite of what it should be Islamically. In fact, our pharmaceutical industry, we as pharmaceutical consumers, essentially fund research for the rest of the world to be able to get cheap, affordable, and safe medicine. So what does Ibn Taymiyyah say? Well, if we look at monopoly, monopoly is wrong because of harm. Price controlling is wrong because of harm. But what if we need to control the price and designate certain people to be able to do that so that we can prevent harm? Like saying everyone who wants to make pharmaceuticals can only sell within this amount of margin and must have their plants inspected. They must provide affordable, high quality, and widespread medicines to the public. If we were literalists about monopoly and price control, we would not allow that. But when we look at the underlying rationale of the Sharia in those two prohibitions, it is to prevent harm, and therefore we allow it when it does not cause harm. Within obviously, and within obviously reason, and within, there's a lot more that goes into this. Okay. When an issue does not have a mujtahid who has addressed it. Al-Buhuti, he says, when an issue occurs that a scholar has not spoken on, not a judge, a mufti, or a mujtahid, then the scholar will take it back to the fundamentals and principles. يرجعه إلى الأصول والقواعد. He says this in Kashaf al-Qina'. This is essentially what Ibn Taymiyyah is saying before. So I go and I look through the books of the Madhhab. Remember when we read Ibn Hajar's treatise on Tahniya bil-A'yad, greeting people on Eid? And we said how people are like all up in arms about Ramadan Mubarak and Eid Mubarak and Jum'ah Mubarak and all that kind of stuff. And in reality, there's nothing wrong or bid'i about it. So what did Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar do in that case? And I'm simply referring this, even though he's a Shafi'i, because if you look, he actually depends on the books of the Hanabila to be able to do this. Okay, so now I'm going to look and I'm going to see what the codified and established books of my school say. I don't find much. I'm going to go and look at this small individual treatises of individual judges and muftis and mujtahids and see what they say, their fatawa. And then I don't find much. I'm going to go to the other madhahib and see what they say. I don't find much. I'm going to go back to the fundamentals and the principles of the Sharia. And then I'm going to start from there and apply what I know from usul al-fiqh to that. Why does this occur? Because there are nawazil mustajidda, there are new issues that arise, and urfun mutajaddid, there is new customs that arise. So it is untenable that a person stick to the customs of 1,000 years ago when the custom of his area has changed and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has only ta'abbadahu, made him devotionally attach himself to the order of Allah. For example, وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, and live with them in a means which is customary, which is dignified. which is well known. Why is it well known? Because everybody knows that this is what's dignified in a way that is good. It's another way of translating it. You go back to early books, وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. You should give your wife a thick coat in the winter and a linen coat, a goose down in the winter, and a linen jacket, a linen overcoat in the summer, and a loaf of bread a day, and salt, and you should bring water from the well for her. If anyone did that these days, it would be unacceptable from them. And how do we know that? Because when we read from the earliest books until we get to today, we find that these customs change, and the customs recorded in the books change over time. This is why Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen, he says that the underlying fundamental and principle here is وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. So when something is considered what is part of nafaqa urfan, it becomes part of nafaqa. And when it is not, it is not. So for example, medicine. You'll have some people who will foolishly say a man is not responsible for the medical care of his wife. This is wrong. Why was that even said in the medieval period? It was said because most people were using home remedies, and they were healing themselves in their homes, and they would only go to doctors for those things which were absolute necessities or luxuries. So it was as if to say he's not responsible for those luxuries that he can't provide. Just as today, a man might be responsible for his wife's medical care, of making sure that she can get a yearly checkup, that she has, aspirin and the basics in her home. But he's not responsible for elective, non-essential medical procedures. So Ibn Badran, he says, the rulings that result from the corollary evidences are dependent upon them whenever they present. When they become null, so do the rulings. He says this in Al-Uqud al-Yaqutiyya. Al-Ahkam مبنية على أدلتها متى وجدت فإذا انتفت انتفى الأحكام. Don't quote me on that. I'm backwards translating. So the rulings that arise, they come from the evidences. And when and those evidences have rationale, and when those rationale are present, we apply them. And when those rationale are not present, we do not apply them. So now we have to understand, how do we apply rationale properly to the areas of fiqh, to the new issues that arise and the new customs that arise. And that means we need to know usul al-fiqh. So what school comes next if there is no school? So let's say, for example, we went through, we said Ahmed, nothing. Al-Ashab, nothing. No ihtimalat, no fatawi, no aqliya, no ara mujtahideen, nothing. So I didn't find anything in the madhhab about this. Okay, before I go to the usul and the ahkam, let me get a sense of what someone else has said. So Imam Ahmed in Riwayat al-Maymuni, he says, إياك أن تقول قولا وليس لك فيه إمام أو كما ورد عنه رحمه الله تعالى. Beware of speaking on an issue that you do not have an imam in. Does this mean we are slavishly bound to only state what has come before? No, it is not, as we have seen from the text of the madhab itself. But what does this mean? There are three positions on this. That one, not addressing the issue at all. At-tawaqquf. Just saying, no, hands up in the air. I can't answer this. But is that a reasonable position to have when an answer is needed? No, it's not. The other is finding another imam that addresses it. And some have said there's mana' here, that you don't go to another imam and do taqleed. If you have the ability to address it, then you have to address it. if you're from the people of ijtihad, according to the levels of ijtihad in the madhab that we talked about previously. And then it is permissible in the madhab to address it with ijtihad. So the Hanbali madhab does not say that the door to ijtihad is closed. Get that. The Hanbali madhab is the broadest madhab in mentioning all masail of fiqh, yet does not close the door to ijtihad. Why? Because the fundamentals of knowledge will always be constants, and the applications will always change. And this is one of my teachers said to me this outside of the masjid in our neighborhood. اهتم بأصول المسائل لا بفروعها فإذا ضبطت الأصول أحكمت الفروع. That focus on the fundamentals behind the issues, not their individual applications. If you get the fundamentals down, the applications will come naturally because they're always changing, but the principle is standard. So what did the Hanabila do? For example, some Hanabila preferred that when I don't find anything in the Hanbali madhab and I want to get a sense of what someone else has said, I go and I look at the books of the Hanafis. Why? Because the Hanafi school arose in the same milieu as the Hanbali school in Iraq. They're both Iraqi schools. And Imam Ahmed al-Hanbal, he studied with whom? Al-Qadi Abu Yusuf, and he was a contemporary of Muhammad ibn Hassan. So they say the similarity in furu' lets us go to see what the Hanafi said. Others said, go to the Shafi'i school because there's similarities in usul. And the truth is, you can go to either of those or the Maliki school. The important thing is you get a sense of it, but the ijtihad will happen according to the usul of the Hanabila. Now, a very important thing that the scholars of the Hanbali school mention, and that is that they say there is a time that you do not follow the madhab. When there is a ruling that is based on something which opposes the book of Allah, which opposes the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is considered a slip up of one of the ulama, min zallat al-ulama, you don't follow what they said. You follow what the texts say. When a ruling is also based on circumstances that change with custom or utility, you don't follow what the madhab says. You take the substantive principle, you apply it to the situation. An example of this would be deficiencies in sales, uyub al-mabi' or uyub al-bay'. When you sell something and it's deficient, if I were to go to the store and I were to purchase bananas that were slightly brown on the outside, would it be acceptable for me to start to eat those bananas and then go back and return the bananas and force the person to take the money back? What do you guys think? No, it wouldn't. Because with bleeding edge and logistics chains, which are bringing the fruit to our doorstep, it has closed the gap. MashaAllah, Asma, nice to see you here. It has closed the gap between the utility of that thing and the opportunity of using it, which essentially is gharar. Gharar is the gap between the knowledge you have of a thing and its utility. Even if you haven't already eaten it, even if you hadn't eaten it at all, can you go and say, no, brother, this is defective because, anything which is bruised or bad must be returned and replaced? That's the nature of a banana. So you can't use a change in urf, or you can't use the urf of 200 years ago to rule on the urf of today. We mentioned the amounts of nafaqah that are due, the types of nafaqah that are due, the maintenance for one's wife and children and parents and so on and so forth. That you can't go and say, honey, all I owe you is one loaf of bread. So no, you have to pay me $4,000 a month, $5,000 a month. No, I can't do that, right? But I can put you in a reasonable home with all of the bills paid, with some spending money. So there's a difference between the types of nafaqah that happened in the medieval period and the late medieval period and the things that happen today. The methods for concluding contracts. If I got into the comments right now, okay, and I said to Sharif, right? Sharif is here. I said to Sharif, Sharif, do you agree to buy this book? Do you agree to buy this book? And Sharif says, yes, I agree. And then I say, okay, I agree too. And I type, I agree to sell you the book for $5, for example. So we get the literalists won't come and say you actually sold it to him in the comments. I put that in the comments. I agree to sell you the book for $5. He types, I accept. If he types, I accept, khalas, I've sold him the book. We've concluded the wholesale over text. Had that happened at all during the early period of Islam? No, because, see, khalas. He had to put, for example, but that's all right. So now he says, I accept. He and I never spoke. He only saw this picture of the book. Why would that be valid? Because the urf has changed in how things are sold over the internet. And the expectations of that custom have changed from how things are sold. That's the whole point. And now, as a gift, Sharif, you get the next book I print, inshallah, you get for free as a gift from me. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for playing. Okay. So when not to follow the madhab, when it goes against the Quran, when it goes against the Sunnah, when it is clearly the mistake of a scholar, when it goes against custom, when it goes against benefit, by applying the custom and the utility of a foregone time to the modern period. Yes. And he has witnesses. MashaAllah. Khalas. Okay. There is a concept known as talfiq. What is talfiq in the Hanbali school? Talfiq is for a muqallid to bring in one issue with two separate furu' or more that are connected by a single attribute when their mujtahid they follow has not stated as such. So, for example, somebody makes wudu, and instead of taking his wet hands and wiping the entirety of his head, he takes his wet hands and he wipes part of his head. So, it's enough for me to wipe 1/4 of the head. Then he goes and he touches a non-mahram. Is his salah valid or not? These are the types of issues that they bring up. There was actually an academic study done, rather good one, honestly, on the issue of like the history of talfiq. I'm drawing a blank on it right now. Regardless, it's that kind of issue where one scholar says this is allowed, others say it's not. Other scholars say touching a non-mahram breaks your wudu, the others say it's not. How do you conjoin those issues? What do you do? Can you conjoin those issues? So in the school, is talfiq permissible? Some later Hanabila, they say that it is never permissible. This is found in the book of Zawaid by Al-Hussein. Some of them say, like Sheikh Mar'i, Hassan al-Shatti, al-Ruhaybani, they say that it is permissible with conditions. What do they mean by that? That it's permitted by a rukhsa, that there is a dispensation or allowance for it, that it does not result in invalidating the ruling of a judge, that it doesn't go against ijma', and it doesn't result in a self-contradicting situation no mujtahid would permit. So the wudu example is out of there. What do we mean when we're talking about taking a rukhsa, taking a dispensation or an allowance? What this means is you're taking the ijtihad of another school that permits something instead of the ijtihad of the school that you follow that doesn't permit it. So we've already talked about the where the Hanbali school has a rajih wal marjuh, has the predominant opinion, the preponderant opinion according to the evidences, and the less preponderant opinion. We've already talked about that. This is where we're saying we have an opinion of the school and a completely different opinion by another school. The standard opinion, according to Sharh al-Kawkab and Musawwada and Kashaf al-Qina', is this is not permitted. This is not permitted. Other madhahib, they say that this is permitted, that you can take the ruling of another school. The third opinion, expressed by Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim, is that it's obligatory for the muqallid to seek the closest madhab to the dalil or the more knowledgeable of the muftis and not simply pick and choose. So if I'm a muqallid and I live, for example, here in Houston, okay, and I say, okay, I have my local imam. He's a Hanbali, okay, and he's knowledgeable, but he's not the most knowledgeable person. And I ask him something, but I go to Sheikh Salah al-Sawi, who, although he studied the Hanbali school, he's a Hanafi, if I recall correctly, or he studied the Hanafi school throughout all his studies, and he's clearly the more knowledgeable of the two. And he gives me a dispensation that the normative opinion of the Hanbali school wouldn't allow. Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim are not saying go fatwa shopping. That's not what they're saying here. They're saying, as a muqallid, as a person who doesn't have access to deep research and to dig into the issues, if you go to one scholar and another, and this scholar says, yes, here's why, this is the proof, here's an ayah or a hadith, and this scholar says, no, I don't know why, but it's no, then you go to the one that gave you a dalil. If you go to both of them and one says, yes, but he's more knowledgeable than the other scholars of the area, and the other one says no, but you know that he's not as knowledgeable as the other one, then you go with the more knowledgeable of the two muftis. Why? Because your yaqeen is in فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. This is interesting. Reminds me of the case in Canada where this thumbs up emoji was argued to mean that the defendant agreed to sell some things. So it's a good example of the urf, I think. That's actually really interesting. Okay. When we start talking about fatawa, what is now we're getting to the point where, you know, we're beyond just reading in the books. We're trying to answer live questions according to the madhab. What is hadithatu fatwa or waqi'atu fatwa? What is a fatwa appeal? It's the circumstance for which a fatwa is being sought, where a mujtahid is being requested to apply the general principles of the sharia to a specific situation. It is more specific, it is more general. It is more specific than the general fiqh appeal, waqi'at fiqhiyya, where somebody just says, hey, what if this happened? What does Islam say? So the general answer would be, well, Islam says nothing. The scholars who speak for Islam will say what the Islamic ruling may be. But that's very different than saying, I'm in this situation, I need it to be answered. So what is necessary for giving a fatwa in the madhab? Obviously, we've already said that the person needs to have a level of ijtihad that allows them to ascertain the rulings, evidences, and methods of the madhab. But now we're talking about the specific situation. So we need ma'rifat al-adillah, knowledge of the shari'i evidences. We need knowledge of the causes, what caused that situation to come about. Knowledge of judicial evidence, of bayinat, of how do I collect evidence. And this is very close to how issues are adjudicated by judges. What's the difference? What's the difference, guys? It's very close to how issues are adjudicated by judges, but what's the difference? What's the difference? The difference is that the Mufti does not have the ability to force anyone to take his opinion, whereas the Qadi, the judge, has sifatul ilzam. He has the ability to execute on that opinion and force the people that have come to him to take that opinion and to apply it, even if they don't agree. But the process is very important, because sometimes people, and we talked about this when we talked about the overuse of the word fatwa, fatawa fiqhiyya, fatawa lughawiyya, fatawa siyasiyya. They're not going through any semblance of the idea of collecting information that informs a legal decision. What evidences are needed for this waqi'at fatwa, this fatwa occurrence, or this fatwa appeal? So he said, waqi'at al-fatwa, this fatwa appeal, is the situation being asked about. Now we have wuqu' al-fatwa. We have the application or the occurrence of the fatwa. How is this fatwa going to be taken and applied? So we have adillat wuqu' al-fatwa and adillat wuqu' al-hukm al-shar'i. What is the difference between the two? Well, first, what do they include? The evidences for the occurrence of a fatwa are things like reason, sensory perception, custom, convention, expertise, calculation, survey, and then stare decisis, istishab al-hal. I'll just use stare decisis as shorthand. It's the same thing. Taking the ruling, saying this ruling did apply, it continues to apply until it is no longer applicable. Adillat wuqu' al-hukm al-shar'i, the evidences for the application of the shar'i ruling are the applicability of haram, makruh, mubah, mustahab, wajib, according to usul al-fiqh. So one of them essentially allows us to uncover what we're going to apply number 2 to. So what are the differences between? There's two differences between. Number 2, which is the rules, the ahkam, wajib, mustahab, mubah, makruh, haram. These are placed by shari', the legislator, Allah and His Messenger. They're set in motion by you. You're the one that either abstains or obliges. Number one is set in motion by the mukallaf. So the idea of custom and convention. You come and you say, this is the custom. If I said, I will sell you a Mustang. When I say I'll sell you a Mustang, what immediately comes to mind, guys? If I sell you a Mustang, what do you guys think? If I say I'll sell you a Mustang, what comes to mind? Yeah, what comes to mind is somebody says a red car. What else? Oh yeah, a car, if that brand. Sharif says, what color and year? Is a car guy. Red or yellow? A red or yellow horse. Which color horse do you want? Salihat. You guys are thinking a car. I live in Texas. It was born in 2021. It's a brown Mustang horse. Do I have title? We don't issue titles to horses here in Texas. So now if I said, I sell you a Mustang for 30,000, you say, I accept. Oh, Rashad saying the car, not the horse, but I live in Texas. Right down the street, there's a horse stable from my house, right down the street. I'm talking about horses. So see how the custom is setting into motion what I'm selling. Whether or not I'm obliged to sell you that or you're obliged to accept it is something that is decided by the Shari'ah, by the legislator. So number 2 is restricted to these 5 rulings. Whereas all of the different customs and conventions and circumstances, they're unknown, they're restricted. They're unrestricted. They're unknown and restricted. Infinite. Number 2, wajib, mustahab, mubah, makruh, haram is general to all people of legal capacity and age. Whereas number 1, all of the circumstances of me selling you a Mustang or not is specific to the Mufti we ask and the fatwa that he issues. أحسنت يا كريم. الحكم على الشيء فرع عن تصوره. Ruling on something is contingent on conceptualizing it. So the very first thing that a Mufti would do is he would say, well, first of all, where were you guys selling this horse? And you say, no, it's not a horse, it's a car. And I say, it's a horse. Okay, where were you when you made this? We're on the internet. Were you able to see what was being sold? No, I wasn't. So the sale is invalid because you were selling something that was not known to you. Therefore, this is from the ahkam. We have al-ahkam al-taklifiyya, which we talked about, the 5. And then we have al-ahkam al-wada'iyya, which are things like batil, fasid, sahih. But this only applies to when I'm selling you a Mustang in this situation. This doesn't apply to anyone else selling a Mustang because they may have completely different circumstances. So understanding the circumstances that you're in, the role of usul al-fiqh in putting parameters around those circumstances, and then underneath that, this rich pool of information in the madhhab that you can draw from is all part of answering a fatwa in the madhhab. So it is an iterative, living and breathing process based upon known parameters, known rules, and a known body of knowledge. And with that, we'll conclude today's class. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All right. Any questions before we go on? Move here. Let's go see if there's any questions up here. I have to go back to this. My favorite comment the whole time. Isn't Husari the goat sheikh? Yes. Rahmatullahi alayhi. My favorite reciter of all time. Let's see if there's any on Instagram. Al-Insta. Doesn't look like it. Interesting that shows up on all these platforms. Anyway, I think that's it. Mina says, you said something along the lines of, we part ways with a ruling of a madhhab when it is in conflict with a Quranic statement. Yeah, if someone comes and they say that, yes, I know that daughters are given 2/3, more than one daughter is given 2/3 of the inheritance by the text of the Quran, but I deem that to be invalid, and you find that written in a book of fiqh. You can't come and take that thing from a book of fiqh and say it overrides the Quran. The Hanbalis, they say expressly, throw that out the door. That goes against what the Quran says. That's the idea. Rozair, barakallahu feek. I appreciate it. Can I please share the slides for the presentations? Probably not. And that's because these slides are ever changing, and that's why I'm showing them here in the video so that everybody can get a look at the slides while they're in the video. So I probably will not be sharing the slides. I can almost be certain I'm not going to share the slides. If I did, it may be on the school platform if you're signed up, but I won't be making them public as these lessons are being posted both on school as well as publicly. That would mean we need to have a good understanding of the various nuances of statements of the Quran, and yet in most cases we go to people with knowledge for the very reason that we don't. Well, yeah, I mean, that depends. If you are a student of knowledge or on the path of scholarship, that's one thing. If you're just a regular kind of everyday person, you just go to the scholars that are in your locality and you ask them. Hold on. Alyssa says, I'm reminded of a narration where the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked the Sahabi how he will judge, and he said he would look first at the Book of Allah, then the Sunnah, and then he was asked if he does not find it there. Yeah, this is the hadith of Mu'adh. قال أجتهد رأيي ولا آلو. I will then look to the Book of Allah, the Sunnah of His Messenger, and then I will apply my my judicial acumen and not hesitate. Then yeah, this is pretty well known. I have heard people often say phrases similar to, this madhhab says such and such because a hadith didn't reach the imam. Is this an accurate assessment considering the madhab's ruling isn't based on the opinion of one person? It is an accurate assessment when they are speaking about one imam. And if scholars of the school followed that one imam in that statement, it can be accurate. But it is not always accurate. Because al-adam la yadullu ala al-adam. The lack of evidence is not evident, or the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So when a legal school in its entirety doesn't entertain an evidence, it doesn't mean necessarily that that evidence didn't reach that scholar or scholars. It may mean that they did not see it of the level because of the truth value that imparts, its veracity as far as how it was narrated, or its ability to become more preponderant than the other evidences that were in the school. What is the minimum criteria to be labeled a scholar? So uh, that's very broad because there are different levels of scholarship. But generally, the scholars are who the scholars say they are. So you know who a scholar is by other scholars saying this person is a scholar. Number one, you know who a scholar is by that person's knowledge output and their writing. Number two, you know a scholar through the students of that scholar. Number three, you know a scholar through the lessons of that scholar. And all of this is, are they in proximity to what is in the book of Allah and what is in the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam? They have gone through study with those that have preceded them, and when they speak, they don't speak out of turn. They don't speak out of turn of what are the normative or the norms of the Quran and the Sunnah. So Abu Salihat, about that hadith, there is there's considerable debate about the um the phrasing of that hadith. That's why. If you have a sheikh who followed the Hanbali school and that's what you've used for years, and then the sheikh leaves, should you continue to follow the school or the Hanafi school with the new sheikh? If you are a student studying one of those schools as a student, then follow whatever who you're actively teaching with. Otherwise, if you have been following the fatwa of a mufti or a scholar in your area who said, hey, when you want to do this, do that, then continue to follow that person. I hope that makes sense, Yusuf. Alrighty, it's 10:45, and somebody says here on Instagram, taking into consideration the time, context, and custom when a ruling was provided, is this what is applied when a ruling changes over time, like the permissibility of coffee or tobacco smoke? Yes. So essentially, you'll find that it was a process of discovery. So, hey, people are smoking this stuff. What is it? Well, it gives them energy and allows them to stay up at night. Well, sounds halal to me. I don't mean to make light of it, but that's what some have said. You can find scholars who have said, they say, okay, some scholars have said that smoking is wajib. Some have said it's mustahab. Some said it's mubah. Some said it's makruh, and some said it's haram. All of them based upon the information that had reached them. Those who said it was wajib, they said, hey, all we know is that when you inhale this, it gives you energy, and that allows you to work harder or stand longer in night in prayer or read longer. So that doesn't sound too bad to me. Those who said that it was mustahab said, well, we can't really say that it's wajib to do that because nobody is obliged to do those things, but we can say that it's recommended if a person wants to do this. And others said, well, we can't really impart a religious ruling to this. It's like eating food, and that's just generally allowed. Others said, no, it's disliked because it has a bad smell, and people who smoke too much, their teeth get bad and their teeth rot out. And then others said, no, this is haram because not only do their teeth rot out and they have a bad smell, but it harms the people around them and it causes them to get sick. And we've discovered that this is poisonous and they're poisoning themselves over time, and it is haram to poison themselves. And the rulings of Islam say, what? La darara wa la dirar. There should be no harm, no reciprocating harm. So we can go and find kind of a breadth of rulings in almost anything. The question is, are we being faithful to our application of the signs Allah has given us to be applied to the situations that are applied in front of us? So, Livonius, I appreciate that. Jazakallah khairan. And we're actually going to go into that issue a little bit more in like 2-3 lessons. So inshallah ta'ala, um we'll go more into that then, inshallah ta'ala. Does one have to taste something before they can give a fatwa, or is it enough to be that they heard what others said about it to give a ruling? Do they have to taste something? I don't know. Is it good food? I don't know. Yeah, I would need more specifics. Regardless, everyone, appreciate you tuning in. Jazakumullahu khairan. And we're going to cut out for the night, inshallah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.